Have you had a friend or a family member reach out recently asking, how do I buy Bitcoin? Or, what's the next crypto to go to the moon? I have, and typically this is not a good sign. These people reaching out to ask isn't just casual curiosity. It's a signal and one that shows up every single cycle. Retail floods in when prices are already vertical, headlines are euphoric, and influencers are shilling garbage, at least more so than usual. By the time your cousin or old uni mate is texting you asking you for crypto tips, smart money is already selling into the hype, which means it's the tail end of the trend, not the start of it. So is this the signal? At least in the short term, arguably yes. Many of the big name crypto are down by 10 to 20%. But what about the bigger picture, the end of the overall cycle? Well, I suspect not. There's no confirmation and the trends are still up, but always remember that confirmation comes at the cost of lower prices. There's a chunk in the middle or rather closer to the end where everyone is right for a period of time. And I do suspect that's what we're in right now. Now, I might be wrong in that, of course, because no one knows the future, but the charts and trends will lead the way, which is what we cover in these videos. But even so, I will not be ignoring the signal because they do come around at every single cycle peak. But as we've just witnessed, they also occur in the shorter term timeframes, with this recent dump being just one example. Whether or not it's the start of something bigger does remain to be seen, but we will be following the charts and trends so that we can stay one step ahead. Now, before we do, quick reminder that I'm not a financial advisor. Always do your own due diligence, and research and past results are not indicative of future performance. Now, if you're a brand new subscriber to the channel, I'd highly encourage you to join us in the Investor Accelerator community. There's a link in the kick it off. We'll take a look at XRP, which is down over 17 in just a matter of days now. The key level we were tracking really closely was 3.40. And if you recall from yesterday's video, I spoke about for this last little period here above that zone to actually be distribution. Now that became clear just a couple of days ago, where we had another attempt higher in price, where we actually saw the highest daily close in history. But the canary in the coal mine that was actually a sign of weakness was the fact that we had divergence in volume. We had much lower volume on a push higher, which is never a good sign. And if you recall from yesterday's video, I spoke about the earlier sign that the market wanted to dump being a 15-minute lower high beneath $3.40. So just to show you exactly what I'm talking about here, I have the TIA again swing indicator turned on, which will load in just a moment. We had the breakdown beneath $3.40, and then we had that signal I talk about, that confirmation signal I talk about being consecutive closes and a lower high using the TI again swing indicator, which did lead to the further sell-off and much lower prices. Now, if you were just looking for a straight breakdown, it was a very simple and clear signal beneath that $3.40 level. But if you're looking for confirmation, that's what I look out for. So if you are less than 1 week old to the channel, it should be abundantly clear what I'm talking about by the way of confirmation signals. It is just a matter of timeframes and knowing which timeframe you are paying attention to and how the lower timeframes are always a lead on the higher term timeframes. Now, since we had that breakdown, we had price correct down to that even $3 psychological level, just a touch above there by a couple of cents. That is the exact level we're tracking for price to actually correct to in the event of getting that breakdown beneath 340. So that's all history, that's all done and dusted. What is going to happen next? Well, of course, that's the billion-dollar question, but all we're looking at now in terms of support and resistance is how breakdown zones can become resistance when they're tested from the underside. So that being the case, any bounce up from here in XRP has a high risk of failure around that particular level. I've showed you that recently in Bitcoin and many times before, depending how long you've been watching my channel for, but we had that high risk zone of failure in Bitcoin as we approached this level from the underside. We didn't get any confirmation on the top, and we've just seen a lot of selling pressure. When it comes to XRP, this is the zone now I'm looking out for as that high-risk zone of failure at $3.40. So time will tell us to whether we actually get selling pressure come into the market around that zone, if it even gets up that far at all. But in terms of a stronger market, we need to be seeing a break on top with closes and higher lows before we can start getting excited about much higher prices. Now, other than $3 on the underside, which I'll leave this line just here for you, if we happen to see further weakness and a further breakdown beneath that level, the next support zone doesn't come in until about $2.65. Now, we're still a long way away from that actually happening, but just to share with you how I'm thinking ahead in the market. Everything in between around $3.40 and $3 could end up being a pretty choppy market. So we will cover this one day at a time. There's no point getting too far ahead of ourselves, but at least for XRP, it's conforming to the rules and signals very nicely. Over to Ethereum, where we can clearly see the bears are in control. Now, I'm going to be analyzing the 4-hour chart in this video, which is a little bit different from the daily chart, which I typically look at. But the reason for that is in yesterday's video, we identified the short-term bears were in control, but at that time, we still had uptrends on the 2-bar and 3-bar timeframes. What we're seeing now is a clear breakdown and trend confluence across the board, and that actually took place quite a while ago. The earliest indicator of a downtrend was back here, but then we had the higher timeframe confirmation based on this chart here, the 4-hour chart, right around this period here. And since then, we've just had a continuation south. Well, what does that all mean? Well, if we just take a step back and look at the pivot points, both on the overside and underside, we already knew that we had resistance at $3,800. And what typically happens, at least by the way that I treat the markets and how I treat the charts, is that when we start to see signs of weakness and breakdowns beneath our pivot points, I look out for continuation down to the next zone. Now, it doesn't mean the market's going to stop dead on this pivot point at $3,400. This is just the next area I am looking at for some potential support. If we happen to break through and we see further signs of weakness by the way of closes and lower highs, then we just look out for a further continuation down to that next line. It's not about trying to pick bottoms or anything like that. We already know the short-term bears are in control. It's just looking out for when we might see that start to flip and for the momentum to change direction, but we are yet to see that take place. So we have the overhead ceiling at $3,800, the underside floor for the time being at $3,400. And while the short-term bears are in control, if you are more focused on the daily time frame, we were already preparing for some choppy market action within this particular zone here. So perhaps that's exactly what we're seeing at the moment until getting some confirmation on the overside or underside. We'll take a quick look at some of the other large players before diving into Bitcoin and the market data. And to kick it off with Solana here, we can already see that we had one of our favorite reversal signals being 7 bars or more in a single swing direction. You can see in this one single upswing from bottom to top, we had 7 bars, and whenever we see a swing direction change from that point, it increases the chance of a large reversal, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. So broadly speaking, while Solana has been looking pretty good for the last few months, with some nice clean uptrends taking place, what we want to be looking at for now for further strength and continuation is for us to get some closes and higher lows above around $195. Beneath that level is some short-term weakness where the short-term bears are in control, but it won't take much for that to change from its current position because at the moment we are just seeing a correction within an uptrend. What would be a bad sign for the intermediate to longer term charts is if we start to see a breakdown beneath around $180 followed by some higher timeframe closes and lower highs, because that would be indicating a larger reversal down to around $150. Over to SUI, which is still holding on top at least for now a very important 50% level at $3.54. The short-term bears are also in control. You can see that by the way of the 1-day, 1-bar trend. Now, if we do start to see some close and lower highs beneath this halfway point at 354, then we're likely going to be seeing a continuation down to that $3 price point being the 50% level from this last run-up. So there are a couple of clear pivot points in play at the moment. What I'm looking out for to get some further upside momentum and volatility in SUI is for us to get a break on top of those last 2 peaks at around $4.30, followed by close and higher lows. Then SUI will be on track to test and potentially break through its previous all-time high, but there's still a bit of work to do before getting to that position. Say it's breaking down a little bit harder, down now over 18% from its peak. We are sitting at about 18.45%, and we are seeing consecutive down bar after consecutive down bar. So for Say to be getting into a better position where the momentum will be back in the hands of the bulls, I want to be seeing a breakout on top of this trend line here. We still have resistance at a higher time frame, 50% level at 43 cents, but this here will be one of the earliest indications of further strength and momentum. Before we dive into the charts of Bitcoin, we'll take a look at some of the market data where we are getting a clear uptick in the 24-hour liquidations. Currently, we're sitting at about $780 million, which is one of the largest upticks we've seen in a number of weeks. So whether or not we've seen enough to flush out the weekend to actually print a pivot point low, it does remain to be seen. I do happen to think there's going to be a little bit more pain ahead before getting to a pivot point bottom, but of course, we're just going to be following the charts to get those clear signals. But we're certainly ticking up here when it comes to our 24-hour liquidations. The 24-hour volume is still sitting at a very healthy $427 billion up by about 5% in that 24-hour period. So that is positive stuff for seeing the amount of energy sticking around cryptocurrency. It'll be a little bit more clear on this chart here, where we are seeing a big continuation in the volume. Just to update that for you so you can see where we currently are, we're sitting at about $74 billion. And if you recall from yesterday's video, saying how I'd actually like to see a little bit of a quieter period here so we can print a higher low in our liquidity chart or a volume liquidity chart here, because that would be setting the market up for the confirmation signal of a further rise in the Bigger picture, so far, so good. We're still seeing a lot of volume. This is a slower moving target, but it's important to come back to time and time again. When it comes to our long-short ratio, we are seeing the shorts favor the market by almost a differential of 3%. When we start to see the market get very heavily skewed in one direction or the other, it does set it up for a faster snapback and reversal. So we're very close to getting that signal at the moment. I'll come back to this one in future videos as well, because when we start to see large levels of liquidations and our long-short ratio signals both happening at once, it does further increase the chance of a pivot point. And because the markets are now trending lower, it'd be a pivot point low that we're looking out for. Now do keep in mind, these signals don't have to happen to actually print a low and reverse. It is just a higher probability signal when they do come together. There is no change for the market sentiment. So I will leave it at that for this video here. I've gone into depth in many videos talking about what I'm watching when it comes to the FOMO Finder analysis and also the traditional fear and greed. But as there's no change, I'll leave it at that until we start to see something different. Over now to the charts of Bitcoin on the daily time frame, where broadly speaking, price is still just stuck within this range. We have a ceiling at around $120,000. We have a floor at around $115,000. Everything in between is just some very choppy market action where no trends have been sustainable. But the moment we see something different take place, being a breakdown with closes and lower highs or a breakout with closes and higher lows, then look out for some fast acceleration in the direction of that signal. If you are looking for earlier leads that Bitcoin is going to be breaking down, then we have our $100 17,000 level, which is also beneath our trend line here. If we start to see some short-term changes of trend beneath that level, then that is the likely precursor for a further continuation down to the next pivot. Point beneath the market, we have around 112,000 down to 110,000. There is some open ground within this window here, so if we get that breakdown, it could very well shoot down quite quickly. And just like there's a little bit of open ground on the underside, if we can get some confirmation on top of this zone here, as soon as we break back into all-time highs, it is all open ground once we get back into price discovery. So it'd be very bullish times ahead once we can actually see that take place. On the 4-hour time frame, the high-risk zone of failure is continuing to